Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in. We'll let everyone trickle in slowly, and start in a couple minutes.
Gunjan, are you wearing an ikat sari?
Yes, yes. From one of our latest collection.
Beautiful.
But as I was saying earlier, I've cheated a bit the way I'm wearing a sari. So I haven't draped it.
Okay, no problem. We can only see the bust, so it's okay.
So, yeah, if I pan my camera around, it's a big mess right now. So that's the best part about these, webinars. Actually, when I was preparing for it, I was remembering when we had spent time, remember, in
Getting ready at pitching, right?
बहुत मजा आ गया था.
बहुत मजा आया था. मैं पुराने pictures hat party देख रही थी अभी कल. I was grouping my pictures. So I saw the hat party, Mad Hatter's party. कितना मजा आता है वहाँ. That was our last travel. Now for very long time we are not going to travel.
Yeah. That's what this whole scene of conferences has changed.
We are starting now.
Yeah.
Hugo, someone's raised their hand. Maybe you want to ask them to put it in the chat.
Sure. Let's have a look. Wait, how can I check for the chat? I'm on getting everything Q&A and all, but no chat. Must have shut it.
It's in the more option,
yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
Yes, amazing. Thank you. Yeah, so whoever was raising their hand, feel free to use the chat, Saikat Ghosh, if you'd like to ask a question or. I think we're at 35. I think we can get started, no?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Great. So thank you everyone for being here on this first session and kickoff of Digikat. So my name is Hugo. I'll be more or less hosting the session and give you a little bit of context as to what we're trying to do, and then leave the floor to our speakers. You may have seen this already, but the idea of Digikat is to create a 3-week-long encounter between the crafts of Ikat and creative coding. And what that means is that we're trying to bridge the two worlds, have practitioners in the world of crafts and and textiles and creative coding come together and collaborate on specific projects, which we will share with you at the end of the session. And the 3 weeks, so this is again the first one, and this is the ICAT primer. And then we'll have 2 more sessions consecutively on slightly different topics, right? So the next week will be more around innovating with ICAT and craft in general. And so trying to think about the pros and cons of the idea of modernizing crafts, right? And what does it mean to involve designers in the crafts process? When does it work? When doesn't it work? And the last one will be specifically just showing the work of the different teams. So a bit of a show and tell. And for any of you who have been involved with Museomix or some of the similar programming, we'll be sharing the work that's been done over the past 3 weeks. Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Gunjan Jen, who will be speaking to us about ICAT and forms and technique. Gunjan is a designer and researcher and the founder of and creative head of Bricks Design. Over to you.
Do I go?
Please.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Digikat team, for organizing this interesting seminar on ICAT and coding, something very new even for me. And yeah, giving me this opportunity to talk about the ICAT practice. It's a very, very broad topic to cover in 10 to 15 minutes, but I'll try my best to share as much as possible. I'm going to share my screen here with you guys. Yeah?
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you.
So to start with, what is ikat? So the word ikat has come from the Malay Indonesian word mengikat, which means to tie a bundle of yarns or threads. And ikat is a resist tie and dye technique used to pattern textiles. Now, usually tie and dye is done on fabrics, but what is unique about ikat is that the tie and dye is done on the yarns prior to weaving the fabric on the loom. The tradition of producing textiles using the ikat techniques is centuries old. And one of the oldest visuals that you can see, the evidence of ikat is found in the murals of Ajanta and Bark caves in India dated 4th to 6th century AD, showing figures wearing garments with ikat patterns on them. I was surprised to learn that ikat practice has been found in some 30 countries in regions as diverse as Central Asia, mostly all Southeast Asian countries, the West Africa, parts of Latin America, and of course, India. And so one can easily say that ikat has traveled across the world. And interestingly, the ikat textiles uniquely display the local flavors of the region where they are produced, where one can find strong local influences on the ikat design, its style, the technique, and the cultural relevance. To give you an example, the region I work in Orissa, there is a festival called Bali Jatra, celebrated every year in many parts of the state to commemorate the ancient maritime trade links between Orissa, earlier known as Kalinga, and Southeast Asia. And ikats, along with other textiles like batik and block prints, formed an important part of this trade culture. And even and you will find this history illustrated even today by ikat weavers in their local saris and textiles. Our recent collection in Bricks is also based on Bali Jatra, where we extensively researched on the motifs, colors, patterns, and narratives of this unique cultural exchange, reflecting distinct characteristics from every region. Coming to the process, I will briefly share how an ikat technique is practiced, though it's very unique again to each region. But I'll illustrate broadly, the basics of ikat technique. So it starts with drawing the desired pattern onto a graph paper. The graph is used as a reference to tie the thread on a frame using careful calculations in order to achieve the exact size and proportion of the pattern when woven. Now, when I watch my weavers working on the frame, it is mind boggling. I mean, they are truly mathematical magicians. And no wonder in history, say the Jacquard loom inspired binary coding in computers. After the tying of the yarns are dyed in the desired color. The dyeing process is carried out multiple times in different colors by the weavers to get the design they have drawn for the fabric to be woven. And once the yarn is ready, the weaver weaves the fabric and the designs that get formed um, they get a very blurred, interesting, unique quality. Now that the repetitive blurred pattern on the fabric is seen as the finesse of ikat rather than the sharpness of the design. And this blurriness in the design depends on the thickness of the yarns and the skill of the weaver when he or she is laying out the pattern. There are broadly two kinds of ikat, single ikat and double ikat. In single ikat, either the warp or the weft yarns are tied and dyed. Double ikat is more complex, where both warp as well as weft yarns are tied. Finally, the ikat fabric is woven, and then after weaving, we generally starch the fabrics with natural agents and let it dry in the sun. Now, popularly in India, ikat is woven on a sari worn by women, which is a 5.5 meter unstitched piece of cloth divided into three parts: the body of the sari, the border on both ends across the width of the sari, and a decorated end piece called pallu. And all three parts may or may not have ikat, displayed, depending on the design layout and the pattern. So in India, mainly three states practice ikat: Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana, and Orissa. Here you can see the popular double ikat designs from each region. The one produced in Orissa is called Pasapali, inspired by the traditional checkerboard dice game. Gujarat produces the most complex double ikat patterns called patolas, mostly inspired by immediate nature, like parrots and elephants are some of the popular recurring motif you find here. In Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, the double ikats are popularly called as telia rumals, which were used as head scarves historically, patronized by Nizams of Hyderabad. Now, unfortunately, there are so many cheaper print replicas of ikat weave available in local markets, which continues to pose a huge threat to the livelihood of ikat weavers and their practice. Now, design narratives have always been an integral part of traditional textiles, and we often treat ikat textiles as material cultural reference for our past, present, and future. And they are mostly region specific, strongly determined by topography, demography, climate, resources, culture, and religion. And these aspects would decide the speciality of a particular ikat from a specific region. Now, the region, for example, where I work in Orissa, interestingly, Hindu temples have been one of the oldest buyers for some of the ikat weavers in this area. On the screen you see an example of the calligraphic ikat piece called fetas that the Jagannath temple buys every year to dress up the deities. And as an experiment using my urban design sensibilities and the expertise of one of our calligraphic ikat weavers, we synergized to create a completely new text of the popular Hanuman Chalisa in natural dyes. Orissa is known for curvilinear fine ikats, and in their designs we find much more conversational expressions. We've been working with natural dyes. You find ikats inspired by uh, architecture, by temple sculptures. Of course, nature has always been an inspiration for traditional ikat designs. Um, Tussar is a local variety of silk indigenous to Orissa, where local communities collect tussar cocoons, and the women in tussar weaving villages still hand spin and hand weave tussar yarn and weave into cloth. So this is a particular example where we worked with a completely new yet indigenous yarn in Orissa, and introduced new innovative techniques of ikat on this new yarn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunjan. And I must commend you on the timing. It must have been a really hard task.
It was, but thank you.
Some really amazing points, I think, between the kind of geographical differences, the link to, the idea of the technique and the link between within the mathematical culture of code and textile history, and the challenge, of the aesthetic being both used within weaving, but also within dyeing, and the competition between the two in terms of cost and such. So thank you very much. Well, just for everyone, please leave your questions in the chat or using the Q&A. We have people collecting them, and we'll go through them at the end. Regarding the poll, Gunjan, do you have a note? We have almost everyone is saying it's a technique, that ikat is a technique. We have a few people saying it's a pattern and a couple of people saying it's a fabric. Would you like to enlighten us on your definition?
It is actually quite a tricky question. I would say most of them are right. It is a technique. And now, over time, the technique is also, the fabric is related to the popular technique. So that's why, popularly the fabrics with this technique are also called as ikat fabrics. But yes, it's a technique.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So I'll share my screen again really quickly to introduce our next speaker. So Bina Rao is the founder of, oh, sorry. The founder and creative head of the sustainable fashion and textile social business Creative Bee. And she will be speaking to us about working with a community of craftspeople and sustaining the practice of ikat in this day and age. Over to you, Bina Rao.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. And I'm delighted to speak about my most passionate subject, handloom, of course. And then today is a handloom day. Unfortunately, lakhs of weavers are in a big problem these days because of COVID. Let's hope and wish that they would see the bright day and we all will emerge with more options to go ahead in life. However, when Professor Nain Sial and Mr. Hugo invited me for this webinar, I was a bit skeptical about. I said, I'm really not in favor of bringing in any semi-mechanized element into this spectrum of handloom, but I don't know what is coding. Of course, Jacquard loom was instrumental in the invention of computer that everyone knows, but then I started doing my homework. Nain is a dear friend and also colleague. So I couldn't say no. And I started doing my homework and I chanced upon a very interesting article about a project in 2016 that was taken up. It's the name itself is very interesting. It says weaving codes and coding weaves. This was taken up by Alex McLean from the School of Music, University of Leeds, and Ellen Haslises from Center of Textile Research from Copenhagen. So you have a textile researcher and a musician trying to demystify or say, discarding the barrier between computer
Merci,
science
merci beaucoup.
and weaving by looking
Au
for
revoir.
common structures and the histories. So there has been attempt at this topic, and I think it's very encouraging for Mr. Hugo and the team of Digikat that a lot of research has already gone into it, and then you would be adding to it. However, I don't want to deviate from my original topic is sustaining ICAT. And I have been passionate, as I said, about handloom for all as a trained designer, of course, but even otherwise, I love that whatever is done by hand. And in this journey of say 27 years that the Creative Bees existence, it was set up by me and my husband, Keshav Rao, and both painter as a basic qualification. And then I went to NID to learn textiles, and that is how my passion for weaving took over my art. And our son, of course, Mani Rao, who is the next generation, and we are sustaining handloom is very important for the younger generation. Warp and weft and sustaining the environment has been at the that is the main focus for Creative Bees activity. But then whenever somebody try to bring in a new element as screen printing on the warp yarn, I would be very worried and alarmed, saying, "Oh no, what's happening? How can you just take away one value chain link, of tying and dyeing, and you cannot screen print the warp?" So we are very emotional or sentimental about the very, what do you say, the historic value chain mechanism of the handloom, and we try to protect it. So I think time is less, and I would like to share my screen so that I can talk and show you what is going on.
Thank you, Veena. And if you can speak just a little bit louder, we have a few people who are saying they're struggling to hear.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, this is my screen here. Yeah, can everyone see my screen now?
Yeah, very visible.
Yeah. So um, what I was trying to say that the ikat is that it's very different from all other weaves. And as a textile designer, most design school students, when they are taught ikat, it is taught in a very basic manner. But when you go in the actual field and you see that ikat technique is so different from any other handloom technique because it involves so many stages of processes and the value chain. And of course, Gunjan has shown the Orissa value chain. I'm not going to spend time on showing Andhra value chain because Andhra or Telangana value chain because time is not enough. But why I'm bringing this up here, and I want the audience to see that ikat is not just weaving. It's not just one weaver who's involved, and it has various stages of tying, dyeing, preparing warp, and weft is everywhere for every weaving technique. But then here the additional techniques are tying, distributing the warp ends as per the graph as you see here. So the designer, whom they call him also designer, because he would adopt the design from the graph and then he would distribute, and then the entire result of the end product depends on his focus. And I really call them genius. And Mr. Hugo would be happy to hear that, I feel there is a link. There is a link to the coding and the way weaver's mind work towards this, segregation of threads as per the graph. You see how laborious is the whole process. Even if 1 mm area is covered more, your design is going to distort. And then it goes for dyeing. What happens if a thread opens up? And what happens, if a motif is distorted? So single ikat and double ikat, both double ikat is still more challenging because you have to really match warp and weft yarn, and then harnessing the loom itself. After having done all the stages of process, you come with your new warp to the warp reed where the weaving is finished. And elderly women in the village earn their living through this harnessing the warp and tying the new warp to the reed. So as you see graph, from graph to dyeing, tying to dyeing, and then it comes onto the loom. In between, there was a resurgence of Telia Rumal. Telia Rumal is almost dead. I'm feel very sorry to say that on the handloom day that it's dead, but the original practice of oiling the yarn and dyeing in natural dye, that whole technique is lost now in Telangana and Chirala. But here, the retake of Telia Rumal is came in a big way a couple of years ago in Telangana, and people started enlarging Telia designs and making the saris. This is the original Telia Rumal, where you can see that the elements in the British time, the elements were just taken like clock and plane, and the British elements came in into the Telia Rumal. I have many more original samples in my archive. This is again a retake in silk of Telia Rumal. But what I'm trying to say here is that a designer has still one more link to fill up. That is the paper design, the artwork. So we are at the D school, we are trained to do the proportion, show the proportion of the design on the paper. And then, but the weaver is not fortunate enough to go to the D school. He does not understand. And this is the bridge that is very difficult to cross. There are mistakes likely to happen if you are not communicative enough through visual and through your language. So I had to learn Telugu. I'm from Gujarat. After marrying my husband, I moved to Telangana. So, but when sustaining handloom is such a big subject, in 10 minutes to cover is impossible. But I'm quickly moving on to the first leg of sustaining is to diversification. To begin with, um, this is a Japanese design that has come to India, and huge export, like thousands of meters were exported. That was a golden era of ikat, and the design stayed on. And we still have this design. This is a very recent collection from Creativity. So innovative designs came from abroad, stayed on. Then we have textile design schools like NID, NIFT, graduates started coming out and started taking handloom as their passionate career. And you will see that a very modern, very contemporary kind of, these are our designs, my designs basically, when I'm inspired by Uzbek and South Central Asian large motifs of ikat, but when it comes to my own production, not easy to produce because you need a larger quantity to make the larger repeat. Now, can coding help here? In future, can anything happen which would still let me produce 50 meters or 100 meters of large design, which I am not been able to. Like you see the design that is shown there, I just for one fashion collection, I had to weave about 300 meters because tying for small quantity is not possible. Then diversification in terms of using various yarn. Now handspun wild silk textures had been Creativity's USP. And here you see the silk warp and weft is Gicha and Noil, variety of natural. We are lucky to be designers in India. The whole palette of natural resource in our hand. And so this is one of the fashion show. These are my, I should say, Creativity's modern garment collection of ikat. All of them are azo-free and some of them are natural dyed also. And this is my last show in Hamburg. I was invited for India Week in last October. And I had to show 20 garments in 5 Indian techniques I had shown. And 4 garments were shown in ikat. These are natural dyed ikat fabrics. Creativity has a dye farm. My husband is a natural dye expert. And so Creativity Dye Farm makes a world-class natural dyes on yarn and in printing. And right from the source of raw material to dyeing of yarn happens there, but tying does not happen there. So the tying and putting design onto graph and weaving happens in the villages. This has been a very old collection of home furnishings. I spoke about golden era, where each design would run on one loom for for many months. Now I need to go quickly because poll began. I'm just I need to complete this, Mr. Hugo.
Go ahead, no problem.
Yeah.
Please.
Can you? Yeah. I think my screen is locked. Yeah. Yes. So I will quickly run through these designs. Again, sustaining with diversification in terms of product. So not wearable only, or not only for home, but ikat is such a beautiful pattern, it can give such varied pattern that it could be beautiful for anything. And then also people adopt the pattern to the matching, bone china. Or look at this, no dikkat when ikat. This is a slogan that I saw on one of the brands. And quickly coming to my community networking, Creative Bee has a department where we undertake large skill development projects. And this is one of the UN project came our way in India in 2000, in Telangana, 2016 to 2019. We have trained 2,000 underprivileged women, ikat women weavers, who were never earning anything more than 3,000 rupees per month. They were using all carcinogenic dyes, naphthol dyes. So the number of trainings were conducted in 7 villages for azo-free dyes and also natural dyes. And now they are formed into small collectives, and they have their own retail and own B2B market. So which is something really good. But now in COVID time, they are also struggling. Then this is a group from, again, from UN project that we did for East Africa. And sustaining ikat, not only ikat, sustaining our techniques, our environmental friendly approach is very difficult. You can't just be a designer. You have to impart your skill, you have to share your knowledge, and you have to get going. This is a group that came from 4 countries of East Africa, and they were trained here. Then another leg of training happened in Africa. In Africa, there is no ikat left, but I'm very tempted to share. Hugo, just give me 1 minute. As this picture I saw when I was in Zanzibar in Tanzania, and I was on a UN project last year. And I was sitting at a restaurant and I saw, oh, this handsome man wearing so much of ikat, beautiful colors. And I was really fascinated. I said, ikat has survived in Africa. But when I closely observed, they were not, they were mill printed ikat. Sadly, they were all printed textiles, and I'm sure they must be shipped from India. So original, all mill printed, From distance, anybody would think that these are ikat. So this is my last slide, and takeaway from my talk for the audience today is to sustain ikat. Number 1 is you have to diversify the design, the quality, the yarn, but not to deviate from the technique. So if coding is going to interrupt in my technique, in my value chain, I'm not for it, okay? But if it's adding as taking off a shorter way to adopt from graph to the yarn and any such intervention, I would be open for that. Second thing is good quality dyes as per the global standards. Thirdly, you all need to love ikat and only handloom ikat. Thank you. Thank you, Hugo and the team. Have a good day. Any questions now or later?
Right after, but thank you so much, Veena. Yeah. This was incredible. And my apologies again for keeping you going at such a breakneck speed. But really amazing work. And I think, the points you're able to raise about, again, I mean, this theme of dyeing after the fact versus, the weaving and the resist type technique is definitely striking. The idea that they could look so similar.
Yes.
And yet, just drastically different in the way they keep the crafts alive. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I mean, we have some amazing questions coming in also. So we'll circle back.
Sure. Yeah.
And let me just share my screen again and introduce our third speaker. So I'll just need you to stop sharing your screen.
Yes,
if
I stopped.
You don't mind, Veena? Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay. So our next panelist is Ambika Joshi, who will be speaking to us about learning by or through coding. He is the co-founder of Ajaib Ghar. I asked Ocean how to say this, and I'm sorry.
It's perfect.
A management cultural strategy consultancy for museums and cultural projects.
Hi, thanks, Hugo. I'm awfully nervous to follow such great work, and I'm fairly behind in my career in that aspect. So thank you both Gunjan ji and Veena ji. It was a wonderful I think, way for all of us in the Digikat collaboration to understand and, like really delve into the subject. I'll quickly share my screen now, and let me know if the audio is okay, because uh, I've been getting a lot of pings from my mom, who's been, you know, quite strict about this whole thing.
We can hear
Yeah,
you great.
yeah, great. Okay, so so I just kind of thought, since we are talking about ikat, and everything is sort of, today is Handloom Day, I just felt it would be appropriate to call it Handmade Code, us exploring code making and craft through a format that I'll speak of, which is recreating. Uh, I'm Ambika. I'm from Rajasthan. I like to call myself that I was a designer and now I'm a project manager for museums and culture projects. I'm also a creative coder and I'm also a mum. And I'm the co-founder with Nanditi, who's also here with us, of Ajaib Ghar Cultural Services. I have put a link to the presentation at the bottom. Perhaps if some of you would like to follow along with it, please feel free to do so. Uh, where I actually overlapped with craft. Of course, I do not have the wonderful background of other speakers, was on the project Virasate Khalsa. I think some of the people attending may know of it, and several designers have worked on this project in one way or another. It was a great amalgamation of craft, technology, design, and so much more. This also led me to work at the Indian Music Experience, which is a interactive music museum in Bangalore, and also at the Rajasthan Rural Arts Program Music Museum and Hub, which is in Jaipur. And both of these are interactive projects, have a convergence of craft, design, technology, and of course, the last two are a lot about music. Um, Before I start my journey as computational mama, as some of you know me, I just wanted to show you guys a little brief from, I think, most of our past. I have no formal training in coding, but as any other urban Indian born after the mid 80s, these images uh, are the beginning of all of our computational journeys. Napster, Prince, Dave, some of these old computers, and of course MS Paint. And this is not just me. I think all creators nowadays, perhaps even, I don't know, perhaps even some people from Beena Ji's community are using computation through the computer, maybe through their phones in some way or the other. Even if it's just listening to music while they're working. I saw a couple of images where mobile phones were right next to the master designers, as she mentioned their name. It was in 2017 I started exploring coding. It was I don't know if you can hear my son at the back. It was kind of a way for me to look at something that was outside of my work and family, and all that was happening. It was very much for me, and my experimentations made me like start a secret Instagram account where I was putting all kinds of silly little experiments. And it was around that time I found wonderful group of people with whom I could reflect on these creative expressions that I was looking into through code. And in 2019, with some encouragement and some great persuasion, I was part of something called an algorithm, which is organized by Abhinay Koparzi, which is basically where you see the code while we are performing both visuals and music. This is not me, this is the person I was performing with. She was the musician. Her name is Mona Singh. And I also got the opportunity to help Agat Sharma on a theatre performance called Mutatis Mutandis, where we were able to look at what is called computer vision. Now, it's not a major thing. Computer vision just basically means the computer's eye, in a way, what it's seeing. And here you can see that it's kind of tracking words across the eyes of me and Agat and our son at that time, who was probably around 1.5. And then we sort of translated it into the performance space. And then Hugo in 19 as well organized India's first museum mix. Perhaps he'd like to discuss it more. I don't know if that's part of his agenda, where we were able to project some very simple visuals and use body movement to change the interactions on this very beautiful nuptial chamber painting at the Sanskriti Kendra in Delhi. And this is around the lockdown. I think in July, I got a message from Melin, who is also one of the collaborators at Digikat, that she'd like to learn how to code. Melin is a student designer, and I was sort of intrigued to see how I could kind of share my newly learned coding knowledge with her. And I just suggested that, okay, if it's going to be you, let's just get a couple of people together. And we got a group of very enthusiastic women, and we started sessions on basics of something that's called P5JS. That's P5JS. P5JS is a library in a language called JavaScript, and it enables easier access to learning, understanding creative coding. And it's part of a larger project called of creative coding called processing. I'm just plugging in that tomorrow is our processing community day. It is also an online event, and you can find it on HasGeek to sign up. So if some of you find what we're doing here interesting, we would really urge you to see what the community is doing. There's lots of diverse work across different fields. So we thought of looking at recreating artworks as a way to understand coding and some basics. This idea is not my own. It was inspired by a very well-known computational artist called Zach Lieberman. He does a wonderful seminar, like a set of classes called Recreating the Past, where they look at artists and try to recreate them in code. And I mean, for him, it is obviously set within his context of being in the US. And okay, oh, we are running out of time. So so these were the artists that we kind of explored. Nasreen Mohammadi, Zarina Hashmi, Rana Begum, Aisha Zatoi, and Aisha Sultana. I hope I've got the names right. If you want to know more, the presentation's linked at the bottom here. Uh, so we just did it in a very basic format. I opened a PPT. I was on Google Meet with everybody because none of us can meet right now. And we've also been streaming it on Twitch, which is a live streaming platform. So we just took these basic ideas and then we started coding. These are the original artworks, starting from Nasreen Mohammadi on the left. We have Zarina, the right two, then Aisha Jatoi, Rana Begum, and Aisha Sultana. Some of us, obviously, because we are from the design community, sometimes shy away from mathematics and the ideas of calculating. Of course, that's been very evident through ICAT, that that's sort of so essential to the way they work. This is a notebook of Nasreen Mohammadi, a well-known artist who also did a lot of like computational, of course, that time in her diary. These are some of the very exciting and things that have come out of the class. These are from all the different people participating in the session. These are based from the very beginning on Nasreen Mohammadi's work right till the end, where we have their own kind of interpretations right up till blah blah blah. The people in the sessions I've listed here, I hope I haven't missed anybody, and some people who join us on Twitch. So at this point, I just wanted to see how we could map the ideas that were spoken of in terms of craft onto the ideas of coding, because typically we always think of coding and computation as being very industrial. And these are some of the things that are coming to my mind. I urge others also to reflect on it a bit, like coding for value over solutions, coding as a community, which is very strong. And like shout out to all of the people who've kind of helped me get to this place. And coding with care and inclusion. So of course, I think these resonate well with everybody here. And in the end, I would also like to share that some of the people from the introductory sessions also sort of contributed to trying to recreate Ikat, and we felt that would be a way for us to feel introduced to these ideas and be engaged with the ideas of craft, because so much of what we do now is so screen based. So I'm just leaving you guys with 4 images made by Soumya and Maylin. These are absolutely done on code, but I feel like I think they resonate well in terms of the visual uh, images that we've been seeing in the past 2 presentations. Maybe not exactly what's possible, but just ideas and explorations for us to start thinking about this. That's it. I hope I made it on time, and I'll exit from the presentation.
Thank you so much, Ambika. Great, thank you. And no, I think those 3 points you raised at the end about coding as a practice to build a community of care and inclusion and learning, so that the value can be drawn from the experience of coding together is. I mean, I think this Digikat wouldn't have happened had it not been for your coding classes also, and so what's really interesting is that for those of, I mean, a lot of the people attending today are from these different clusters that are heavily related. But for those of you who are new to this group, I think, what's also really interesting from our end, it's that these are a lot of similar efforts that try to slowly kind of inspire each other and grow with slightly different people heading them, So I'd like to pause and open up for the questions. If you're wherever you're joining us from, whether it's YouTube or Zoom, we are collating the questions. I will not be able to get to all of them, but we've been consolidating them slowly. And so I'd like to start with the first one. So Soumya is asking, I'm guessing for Kunjan or Bina, but how do you balance the diversification of designs with maintaining the authenticity of the craft? What kind of collaboration exists or is encouraged between the designer and the craftsperson? So I think, I mean, maybe both of you can say a word about it.
Sure. Gunjan, you go first.
Sure. It's an interesting question. And, in craft, especially, as Beena had pointed out correctly in her presentation, that the weaver is, as much as a designer as anybody, coming from an urban space. So it's literally a collaboration of the two. And when we talk about innovations, working with the traditional craft, history has it that even these crafts have evolved over generations. So is there a period to tradition? Do we have a period linked? No, we don't. So it is an evolving tradition, and so is craft. And that's the space where I think it's beautiful when the weaver and the designers come together to create something innovative, in their own respective putting in their own respective skills and expertise together.
My take on diversification and collaboration with the weaver is that a designer should not be very ambitious. He has to also see the ground reality is how much weaver is absorbing and ready to change his loom. See, when I'm doing the missing weave dupatta that you saw, a shawl, which had a very lovely fall, right? To achieve that fall, I had to change the reed of the loom. Now, is he willing to invest in a new reed once my work is done? So that's why the government projects, which are 1 year duration, where the NIFT students or NIT students are assigned to work with the weaver, these are the kind of hurdles that come in the way, because for short duration, unless there is a guarantee that you would absorb the production, a weaver is not willing to make the changes to his infrastructure or his way of working. So, and when you go with diversification plan, do you provide the raw material? Or are you ready to invest in his loom? Are you ready to arrange a kind of a buyback? So these are the things which, and also in a matter of diversification, you should not kill the technique, because as I was very passionately explaining that even a tire, dyer and the every component of the value chain need to earn. So suddenly you come up with a diversification plan that you don't want tie dye. You are bringing in some automation. Like today in the morning at Telangana Handloom Day celebration, the announcement was made by the Chemical Institute, which is signing an MOU with the government, saying that we would, we would try to find semi-automatic dyeing equipment for handloom ikat weavers, as the dyes are harmful for the weaver. Why can't we change the dyes? Why we need to change the technique? So it's a very sensitive issue, and I think the designers are aware of it, and I'm sure all designers take care of these issues. Thank you.
And on this note, I mean, I think it's a really valuable point also to bring up this idea of new tools, new techniques, especially if we're talking about the involvement of creative coding and how sustainable it is. You know, in our research, we found some programs with DEF and Digikala and some programs introducing computers in communities, but there's no clear sign of the impact. And that project is from 2015. And so clearly that is a challenge to kind of bring in these technologies, but how can they evolve with the community sustainably and not be an extra burden. And on that point, I'd like to move on to the next question, but in between, if I may leave a comment to everyone who is here, I think I'd like to address the elephant in the room that perhaps there are very few craftspeople here or weavers or tyers or dyers. I am assuming, I do not know. But if you have any recommendations on how to, make the conversation welcoming, please let us know, so that we can find a way to be, we tried our best to have Gunjan ma'am or Bina ma'am to speak on their behalf because of your proximity with them. But I just wanted to put that out there. The other question dovetails nicely with what you were speaking about, and it's there are few around this topic, but let me try to find the best one. Yeah, so we have Payal here asking about. I'll just read the whole question. There's a bit of a comment as well, but I am a sixth semester student from NID Haryana. Last December, I did my craft documentation on ikats in Orissa. One thing which all the weavers I met there were concerned about was printed ikat and how it is killing their market. Also, when we were exploring Bargan's market, we found printed ikat kurtas in Reliance Trends store. Any comments on the same? And if I may, this is also something I would like for you to respond to from the perspective of diversification. Have you in your communities opened up to the idea of printed ikat as a way of financing weaving, or how do you kind of manage that space?
You expect me to answer? Yeah.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yes. No, not at all. Printed textiles are a biggest enemy of ikat. Printed ikat is just not accepted, because you could do many things to generate funds for weaving community. You don't have to kill the very craft, and you can't. What do you say? It's like. Designers and creative people have to really put their self-esteem high in thinking that there are n number of creative solutions to our design. And why do we just take ikat? Why are we transforming ikat patterns into mill printed? Is ikat pattern so popular? And is ikat, which is made by handloom, not affordable? That is the reason. If that is the reason, then there are ways and means to reduce the production cost. Government can be advocated for removing GST from the yarn, so the ikat becomes cheaper, and whatever the reason may be. But you cannot accept the mill printed ikat to come into the market and take away the livelihood of lakhs of ikat artisans.
Yeah. I completely agree with Beena. And to add to that, in fact, the government of India in the early 80s had already foreseen this threat of mechanization of such techniques and brought in the Handloom Reservation Act of 1987, where they reserved key 11 articles, lungi, dhoti, gamcha, bed covers, curtains, all made in handloom, to be reserved only to be produced in handloom and not on powerloom or any other automated ways. And this was mostly to protect the livelihood of weavers, because they did realize that this will happen one day and would be pose a huge threat to, our traditional practices, our heritage, and of course the livelihood of weavers. So yes, um, I think we need to keep insisting on policies for sure, beyond design, beyond um, you know improvisation of skill. uh, Policy is something the government has the power to wipe out, if they really want to. And we've seen it, unfortunately, in the last 2 days, since they've dissolved the handloom board, which was the only board that gave some kind of interactive platform between the civil society and the government for the handloom sector. So yes, I think we need to really look into the policies to protect our craft.
Yes.
I really appreciate this, and I mean it segues really well into next week's discussion. Also, this idea that how far can innovation and new designs get you when you actually also need policy support? Thinking about, I mean, what you were saying about removing the GST, but being able to have that level of activism and back and forth between
Yes.
government and civil bodies, even within the crafts world and even within these spaces. So thank you very much. And there was a question on this recent news update, Gunjan. So by bringing it up, I think in the interest of time, I will or rather, if we could have a quick note on how you feel this will affect the weaver and handloom industry. Sorry, I'll ask the question again. This was a little bit confusing, but as to what you had brought up, Gunjan, so Payal is asking, since the Indian government recently abolished the All India Crafts Board, how do you feel it will affect the handloom industry? So we started talking about it, but if there was any kind of second point either of you wanted to bring up, and then I have one more question for Ambika, and then we'll kind of wrap up the session, and I'll give a bit of an update. So Bina or Gunjan, if either of you had a comment on it, or
Yes. I would say that All India Handloom Board, I have been the member for 7 years. I have been on the board of All India Handloom, and there were very few meetings conducted in the past 5 years. So to say that weavers, the board gave the voice to the weavers is not true, because if unless you call for a meeting, unless you read our petitions, unless you address the issues that we are raising, there's no point. So this is what was happening, and we were expecting that something like this would happen, because not even once a year, if we are called, all the members and the viewers representatives, and not heard, then how the solutions can come to our problems. So it will definitely affect, it will make us go in the silence forever. I mean, the handloom industry, there is no one channel open unless they design something new. Is that okay?
thank you.
Enough for now?
No, and I really appreciate the level of nuance we're able to get in these discussions in so little time, or at least for me, because I'm new to these discussions. But yeah, Gunjan, did you want to add anything to this, or?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I think these are very uncertain times, and definitely the government is not helping us in giving us any kind of, protection gear for a secure future in craft for craftspeople. Uh, and as a designer working for so many years in the craft sector, all I can say is that we cannot now wear only one hat. I mean, for me in my work, I think I've been working as a designer, as an activist, as an innovator, and I think that is what is unique about craft, where I think we need to look into it from a lens or a holistic perspective, and an approach that would work for the craft sector as a whole. And that does not only involve design techniques or implementation or improvisation of skills, but yes, addressing even ground issues of policies of replication, which was the earlier question. It's we need to address all of it in a holistic manner, whether we're a designer or we're a coder or we're a weaver. We all have to come together as one voice, and we cannot also, I hear this quite often from people that the government is not doing enough, so we may not want to waste our time engaging with them, but rather doing something on our own to the best of our capability. Well, and to that I would like to say, well, the government is here to stay, and they have a huge say in how the country runs, and also on, especially when it comes to the poor craftspeople, they have a huge influence on their livelihood and their everyday, survival game. So, yes, I don't think so. We can take shortcuts, and we have to engage with the government at every point.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gunjan and Beena, ma'am. So the last question will be for Ambika, and will give us a bit of a segue into the closing statements. I know we're at time, so I think we'll keep this at 5-10 minutes max. But so Pooja is asking, hi Ambika, I would love to learn more about the approach that Soumya and Melin took in generating their Digikat. Did the artworks we see recreate only the visual aspect of ikat, or the type of computation and coding that analog ikat uses?
I did answer on the chat itself, but I think this also, you're right, it segues very well into Digikat, because Hugo had been experimenting with it when Nain saw what he was working on, and I think she gave him a good introduction on what ikat is actually, which many of us are not, even many young Indian designers are sort of getting sort of not so well versed with. Sorry, wrong, whatever. You understand what I'm saying. But the idea is that we try to sort of first engage with it, understand it, and then sort of see what we are able to do with it. And I think the apprehensions of Beena ji in the beginning are where we are trying to sort of kind of move away from that idea of overtaking in any way. And I think that represents well in the way that you have spoken of the general apathy from government and bureaucracy in this aspect. So I think what we are trying to do is sort of engage with it, build it within these languages that we speak as people who are involved in this sort of funny world of coding, etc. And I think that's where we'd like to take it forward, and I'm sure Hugo will explain this in sort of much better way than I can.
Thank you for this, Ambika. Yeah, I think I'd really like to clarify a little bit the intent and the approach of Digikat, and I'll do my best to do this in the next couple of minutes. But I think what was really inspiring was to see how Ambika has been able to use creative coding to by starting by a kind of a visual trigger, replicating the artworks of different artists who have a bit of a mathematical affinity, to use that to little by little uncover the different layers of their process, of their intent, and those complications, right? And so I think what's interesting is with Digikat, I mean, this was set up really quite casually when I was speaking with Nan, and who seemed right away really, and that's Nan Xia, who's here as well, and who's been speaking in the chat. But I think what's been really interesting is that creative coding, as Ambika was saying earlier, is a great way to learn about another process. And I think vice versa, to have communities who depend for their livelihoods and their activity on that other process, to learn about the monolith of technology from a door that's a little bit more approachable, that's a little bit more malleable. What I mean is that creative coding and processing itself, which is an application and a language based on JavaScript, is meant for visual people with big air quotes, and was created for designers in many ways, so that you write very little code and you have a quick response and feedback. And so what I think is interesting is that it really changes your relationship to code, to technology, to software in general. And when we started our research, we realized that there are lots and lots of weaving softwares, which we've collected, and we'll make that available to those of you who are here. But so our point is not to automate any processes, but rather learn about, about the craft and make that kind of an open platform. So in closing, I'll share the 5 concepts that are being worked on. This is because when I was sharing this post, I got a lot of, a lot of people voiced their interest in getting more involved than I was originally expecting. I thought this would just be a webinar, and in 3 weeks we would share with you the work that was done. But so I want to make sure that it's clear what we will be working on, so that you can reach out to us if you have any desire to get involved, if you have any interesting references for us, so on and so forth. So I'll share each concept, the names of those working on these concepts, and at the end I will share the deck itself, so that everything is linked here, so that you can reach out to these different people. Okay. So the first one was rethinking the artisan's signature. So exploring new ways of signing ikat pieces through the mixing of unique patterns and image recognition. So Praveen and Ajitesh are looking at ways of almost like a stamp, seeing how a specific weaving technique can be used to create an aesthetic or an image that is unique to the piece or the craftsperson, and can be recognized by a camera and give access to more information without any focus on how that information is displayed, whether it's AR or something else. They have yet to decide, but so that's concept 1. Concept 2 is ikat and audio. So Salil and Melin are working on using audio to embed the patterns with unique moments and sensibilities. That means that, if you see ikat as this set pattern, it almost looks like it's alive. And so through the creative code, being able to say, if one day you are listening to the birds and recording them, seeing how the sound of the chirping might affect the design of the textile. The third team, Komal, Mike, and Natasha, are looking at the overlaps between ikat and kolam, and exploring possible overlaps and permutations at the intersection of the two crafts. And so they are focusing mainly on the aesthetic and how the two practices and the ceremonies or the performances around each can benefit each other. Fourth one is, Melin and Samart are working on creating a interactive, almost mini website that you can go to better understand the level of intricacy and effort and detail that goes into the creation of ikat weaves. And the fifth one that I'm working on with Nen is a cost calculator, and seeing how you can visualize the financial decision-making process behind the repetition and applying the ikat patterns. So I know one quick comment about all of these, you can tell that these are not always the most utilitarian, and there are different explorations that the various participants were interested in taking on. We're really interested in hearing what you have to say, the references, any concerns you might have, and that will be the focus of the following week. But you can find our process, our discussions, our research, the references we're using on this board. So again, there's a link here that I will be sharing or that you'll have access to once the presentation is done. And I'd like to give a really big thank you to Hasgeek, who's having us, Ambika and Nanditi, who've made this possible and helped us through every little bit of this setup. And Nen Xiao, who's helped us, first of all, give us the confidence to do this, but also get us in touch with such wonderful speakers and community. So thank you very much. And I wish you all a very good day. And I really thank from the bottom of my heart our speakers today for giving us your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And please leave any, I'll stick around for a few more minutes. If you have any questions about the creative coding, anything else, I'll try to clarify doubts. I'll share the have the presentations been shared, or I'll share it right now.
Can I take your permission and leave, Hugo?
Of course, of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
So also the talk is officially over.
Hugo, we could share the links in an email with everyone who registered.
Yeah, I think I'll do that as well, especially for all other people who weren't able to make it.
All right. So I'll take your leave as well. Thank you so much. It was
Thank you so much, Gunjan.
And do share the links with me too. I would love to explore.
Will do. Thank you so much.
All right. All the very best with your projects. Bye.
Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hi, Praveen. Hi, everyone.